So hello, I'm Bruce Calder, the VP Consulting Services here at Claigan. I'm going to take you on the global tour of PFAS regulation. Where is this all going? Is a big part of it. So I'm going to talk about a little bit about where it came from to a certain extent to explain where it's going, which is actually different from where it came from. So a little bit about us. What do we do? Now, when I describe what we do, saying like we work on phthalates or fluoropolymers or water-soluble PFAS salts doesn't really register with a lot of people. So, a lot simple. And by the way I'm describing here also describes a lot of what other people on this call do. You might think, hey, I just work on removing chemicals like DHP and lead from my product. But in reality, what you're doing is you're preventing ADHD, preventing cancer, and you're tracing, you do conflict minerals, tin, tantalum, tungsten, and gold to the warlords in the Congo, which seems pretty much cooler, but it's actually true. If you're working to reduce DHP in products, that prevents ADHD, reduces it. Cancer, lead, asbestos, that kind of thing, reduces cancer. And then, of course, the conflict minerals is related to cutting off the money supply to the warlords in the Congo. So that's a good portion of actually what a lot of us are trying to do, what we do specifically. Now, the way, of course, do that, we have a lot of consulting like this, but good portion of business is, what do you have to comply to? What's the best way to do it? And then how to get there. We definitely focus on the outputs. What do you need to do this? We focus on getting you the most compliance for the least effort. We could try to sell you services that, basically around the idea of revenue generation for us, but realistically, we never intended to be the biggest. We're much larger than we ever intended to be. We intended to be the best and focus on what you need. It's about what you need, not what our shareholders need. It's a little bit different. We do quite a bit of testing. More than half our business is testing, but we have just as much consulting and due diligence. Probably the best lab in the world for complex products. And we do open source intelligence and reporting. Open source intelligence is what you think of as your conflict minerals diligence and that kind of thing. We do a lot more in the ES&G side and the controversy side, ESG and C, and around using open source intelligence to identify source of risk, do due diligence on like refineries and that kind of thing. So a lot in the conflict minerals side. So a lot of what I'm going to focus on today is consulting. Of course, having a testing laboratory in-house really helps become more accurate. We don't have to rely on what one company is now or government copied and pasted from another government, et cetera, which is actually one of the most common things, especially PFAS, is them copying each other. Whatever the original story was, whether it's true or not, or any basis in reality, ends up being copied from one government to the other and isn't necessarily truthful on the current situation. We're definitely the world leader in PFAS in physical products and articles. We're the only private company including the PFAS regulations, PFOA regulations, the UN Stockholm Convention. I'll talk more about that later. The EU, we submitted PFAS derogations to the EU on the behalf of industry, including probably the most comprehensive comparison of materials, including fluoropolymers and fluoroelastomers, and the pros and cons of each. We submitted to the Canadian government PFOA exemptions for the upcoming PFOA restriction here. And Australia, the same thing. Their restriction kicks in the middle of next year. Both of them referred us to the United Nations and I'll talk a little bit about that later. And we submitted, of course, PFAS data to the EPA. And Maine and Minnesota, and of course an ISO 17025 accredited laboratory. The laboratory itself helps us with the consulting. It's also extraordinarily good for compliance. Before I get into PFAS, I'm going to talk about our Lunch and Learn series. So this is our normal webinar meeting. This is like new stuff. So we present webinars more often than we used to, for sure, on new things and try to explain new things. But internally, we've been educating our own staff for years using Lunch and Learn. So we sit them, we feed them, and then explain a complicated topic. Often older regulations are still very much in effect. So it's on our Claigan YouTube channel, where you correspond to other webinars. This is the first in the series. It's the ultimate primer for EU ROHS. It's fantastic. It has a lot to do with where it all came from. I've been working on ROHS for over 20 years now. Where it all came from, which helps explain where it is today, and we're going to talk about where it's going in it. So it's very, very good. It's on the YouTube channel. It's very, very modern, but it goes all the way back to the original part where the EU was suing itself over ROHS and a whole bunch of goodnesses, and how it got to where it is today. Where is it going? And a lot of details. And now to give you a bit of sneak peek, a lot of people on this might say, hey, I know a lot about ROHS. Okay, fair enough. Let's go for it. We'll talk first about due diligence. Everybody's like, okay, I understand due diligence. This is the way we do it. And due diligence doesn't exist under ROHS. We're like, no, it's one of the things you have to do. Nope. Search for it in the ROHS directive. I always love when due diligence is what somebody tries to sell to you. Search for the ROHS directive, not there. Search for it in the conformity assessment procedure and how you do conformity assessment for ROHS. Nope, not there either. They're like, what do you mean? Nope, it's an Anglo-Saxon term that left the EU when the UK left the EU. The term is proportionate or proportionality. You'll find those in the Blue Guy ROHS Directive Decision 768, 2008. It's not due diligence, it's proportionality, or proportionate. You're like, I don't understand. We're doing due diligence. No, due diligence is a simple term they believe your management will understand. So whoever's trying to sell you a service uses that to make a simple sentence to get revenue out of you or your management. The word is proportionality. Should know this. It's actually in the directive. The word due diligence doesn't exist in the ROHS directive. So proportionality, could be ROHS, could be EU REACH, could be REACH SVHC. They all use the same concept. Proportionality is based primarily on two metrics. The degree of hazard or risk you introduced. What did you do in ROHS or low voltage directive or EMC or REACH? What hazard did you introduce? For example, in ROHS, you put thousands of kilograms of lead on the market. That's a high hazard. That's a lot. That could poison recycling workers, etc. Or I said, I unintentionally have lead in a connector. That amount of lead is less than the lead already available in the leaded copper. So that's low. It doesn't make a significant difference in the risk to recycling worker or to the environment, you might say, and to the user. Actually, ROHS is not about the user. It comes into this lunch and learn talks about, this is from the WE directive. So therefore, it's about the safety of recycling workers and the environment. The user is actually not part of it. Low voltage directive, sure, the user is part of that. ROHS, not. So if the lead you had in that one little connector doesn't materially change the amount of lead in your product, you didn't introduce a high risk. You still have to do something. You can't ship a product in that's not compliant, but there's really no hazard, a penalty for the hazard you created. There's no real risk. You didn't change the risk level to the recycling worker. Or it's like 0.5 gram of hexachrome across your products. That's not enough to poison one person. Very low. So the amount of hazard or risk you introduce, the danger to the recycling worker or the environment is very, very low. The other metric is the non-compliance related to a lack of effort. So one of the big things is you can do compliance any way you want. You can do data gathering, you can do testing. You could spin around a circle until you see a higher beam. As long as you write it down and that makes you compliant, that's fine. This is about what happens when you're not compliant. And it's around proportionality. You say that, well, that's why I do diligence. I do due diligence. Due diligence is not a term in ROHS or any of these things. It's called proportionality. It's related to effort. So imagine you have no program. That's a high thing. So imagine I only have lead in one connector, but it's because I haven't done any. Well, then your penalty is related to the lack of effort. It's what effort should you have done, considering your risk and your sales, compared to what your competitors have done or should have done. And you penalize on that lack of effort, not the actual hazard or risk. They want to make sure that companies don't think by saving money and doing less, that means they save money. No, if whatever you do, if it's less and it makes the product compliant, that's fine. This is when the product isn't compliant, which is relatively common. Or you do data gathering only. It's a very high risk. They see that as a high lack of effort. You're like, well, it took effort to get data from the suppliers. You got supplier data, and you say, your product's non-compliant. You say, well, my supplier said it was compliant. The national authorities are used to dealing with the dollar store type things. Their suppliers always say they're compliant. That's not a metric for them. They're going to go, that's fine, but it's not your supplier that put that product on my market. It's under your brand. You're responsible for putting it on my market. What have you done to make sure it's compliant? That's what have you done, not what your suppliers have done. What have you done? And data gathering without double checking is a high penalty. It's a lack of effort because you didn't do things. You might say, hey, management said, we don't have to spend the extra money to do some sporadic testing to prove that, our data gathering is working. Oh, it's a cost issue. The national authorities, and this could be EU, it could be US, it could be Canada, you're like, you didn't do this for cost reasons. We will make sure cost is no longer an issue for this sort of thing. And you can see that in some of the other more recent penalties in restricted materials. If you did it because you didn't do something you should have done, they're going to penalize you the lack of effort. Now, imagine you discovered the non-compliance by yourself. You have the effort, so the penalty is very low. So unless you put thousands of ton lead on the market, you found it yourself. You discovered you did what you're supposed to be doing. You still can't put the product on the market, but you found it. Best is testing representative products, because you have checked whether or not the product's compliant, not just the suppliers. You test representative products and basically said, look, we tested, we missed one. So, but as long as you don't put thousands of pounds of lead on the market or thousands of pounds of DHP, there isn't really any penalty. You can't ship in still non-compliant product. Once you know it's non-compliant, you can't ship it in. But you're basically not looking at recalls or financial penalties or anything like that. And again, all of this is proportionate. The effort scale is also proportionate to the size of the entity and revenue. So if they only sell tens of thousands of dollars on a country's market, they don't expect you to have done as much, because doing extensive testing, we're only selling $10,000 or $20,000 of stuff, isn't proportional. However, if you sell millions of dollars of things and the testing wouldn't have materially affected the cost of your product, they expect you've done it. Now, it's fine if you're compliant. Again, if you're compliant, whatever works to be compliant, if you're compliant, fantastic. This is for when you're not compliant, which is relatively common. Human error is a big factor. What did you do? You're selling millions of dollars and you didn't do something they believe you should have done, and it wouldn't have really materially affected the cost of the product. They have no sympathy. It will make sure product cost or the cost of doing compliance is no longer a question in the equation. They can penalize you the way they seem appropriate. So again, those are the metrics. How much degree of hazard or risk you created because your non-compliance created a large risk to recycling workers or the environment because of the amount of lead, or was it due to a lack of effort? I had no program, or I did data gathering only. I didn't check myself. Did you check? No, my supplier said it's fine. Like, my dog ate my breakfast. They don't care, really don't. Now, if data gathering makes you compliant, fantastic, but this is when it doesn't go well. So again, this is typical lunch and learn. We're looking a lot more of the historical stuff, describing a lot more of the key criteria. It's available on our YouTube site. Feel free to wander through it. If you like it, we're probably gonna do the same thing on REACH restrictions and REACH SVHC and others in the future. And so this is the way we educate internally, actually. We also feed our people. Unfortunately, on YouTube, we won't feed you. You can get Uber Eats or something, but it's a lunch and learn internally. We also, the plan is in January, we should do a formal call for papers. We'll send out to companies and say, hey, and represent, do you want to present at our conference in probably end of September next year? We're just firming that up. It'll be in Ottawa. It's a great time of year. It's when our leaves are changing color. It's fantastic. It's not slush season. It's not humidity season. It's great. Tentative highlights, we haven't asked them yet, but it should be relatively straightforward. They're literally across the street from our public venue. Presentations for the Canadian government on PFAS and plastics. The UN Stockholm Convention has observers here, which we'll probably invite, and they live basically across the street too. There'll be a wide range of industry presentations on a variety of topics. We'll also very likely tour a conflict-free gold refinery. There is one right up the street, actually, from the venue. We're gonna wait. If you've never been to a conflict-free gold refinery, it might be really interesting. You don't get that opportunity that often. And if a lot of this is being driven by NGOs, a lot of this materials restrictions, why don't we get them to present to get their feedback on what they're thinking? Because they drive a lot of this demand or pressure on restricted materials. So why don't we get them to present? Oh, perfect. So topics could be a lot of things. We're still upcoming regulations, common sources of restricted materials, North American regulation, EU regulation, Asia Pacific, chemical exposure for products like Prop 65, managing compliance in a complex business. A lot of you probably on this call have a lot of experience on how, this is actually one of the questions we get all the time. So how do other businesses manage restricted materials compliance? And there'll be great presentations there. We'll probably talk environmental, social, and governance, the conflict minerals and similar, and controversies, the new E, S, and G, and C side of things. So until the web page is set up, if you have any ideas or topics you'd like to present on, feel free to reach out on our website. We should have a mailer in January that'll have a web page and a form. We can do things a little more organized, but at least gives people some ideas, things they might want to present about. Definitely getting lots of diverse presentations. We'll probably run a pretty broad whole venue and schedule, so it'd be really interesting. So just to get people thinking about that now. And they're like, we showed up for PFAS. I'm like, okay, now here we go, PFAS. Up until now, what has been driving PFAS regulation? The reason I'm going to talk about this, it explains a lot of things, the way things are, and then I'm going to explain why things are changing. So it's driven a lot by journalism. These are people who may or may not have any technical basis in this, selling on headlines. Study links high PFAS levels of Superfund sites and limited fresh food access. Texas farmers say sewage-based fertilizer tainted with forever chemicals poisoned their land and killed their livestock. Now that's pretty sensational. Now, I'm in the science field. This is an interesting one, and I don't think the average public internalizes this or knows whatsoever. Most science paper writers are very much like the Kardashians. Their whole goal is publicity. They need it for grants, other things. It's publicity. These science papers, what's driving the motivation is economic, and it's very much like the Kardashians. It's not that much different. Some are more photogenic than others, but that's really the driving force. So the sensationalism being published like this is very much intertwined with their own personal success, either viewed amongst each other and in money. Lawsuits, lots of lawsuits. Now, I think a lot of these, somebody like, oh, being sued about being Teflon. They're not being sued about being Teflon. They're being sued about the liquid versions, the surfactant side, et cetera. And in a lot of these cases, we could help them a lot, especially some of the original ones. Like the original epidemiology is so vastly flawed on the plaintiff side that definitely, I don't know what they were doing at the time, but there are a lot better defenses that could be mounted. And then, of course, movies. The actor plays the Incredible Hulk in the Avengers, makes a movie, gets tons of sensationalism. That is a huge driving force. And you say, well, really that bad? Really? How many people in the last week have asked you about microplastics? That's because they watched a documentary on Netflix in the past week. Microplastics aren't that big of a deal. That said, a lot of people say, oh, I'm worried about microplastics. I'm like, cool, they're often moms. I'm like, good, just don't use makeup. Then they stare at me, well, I'm not going to not use makeup. I'm like, well, here we are. Makeup, because it's too hard to redesign. Like redesigning glitter out of makeup is too hard, so they don't actually have to comply to microplastics until I think 2032 or 2036 or so. Far off, a distant time. Yeah, so truth is. Now, in terms of also how we got there, in terms of, let's look at one of the major drivers. Let's look at state of Maine. State of Maine being one of the first, torch bearers in the U.S. state. So how did they get here? Well, this is very modern day. This is today's basically data. And what I'm going to talk about took about 5 minutes, maybe 10 minutes of work. I think pasting it took half of it. So the state of Maine, I must give them great credit. They do put all their PFAS water measurements on a website you can interact with. Most places hide it. It's actually very difficult to access. So whatever they say about PFAS, I don't necessarily believe it one way or another because I can't look at the data. But this is the state of Maine. So what do we said? Okay, why don't we take one of the high threshold ones? 20 parts per trillion is not very high, but we'll say that's high threshold. Very high threshold location. So there's one right there. Fulton Mobile Home Parks. First one I chose is on the New Brunswick border. It's where my in-laws are from. New Brunswick is like Maine, but more so. It's very nice. I go there every year. So that's right on the New Brunswick border in the county of Aroostook. That's a lot of O's, by the way. Not to really, if you're from Aroostook, I apologize, but goodness, that's a lot of O's. Anyway, so here's a fairly contaminated site. I'm like, okay, this is what Maine's complaining about. This is why they're making PFAS rules. Cool. Okay, this one also has news stories. They've relied on bottled water for 4 years after finding PFAS in the well. Here's the sensationalism, the journalism, which is driving them along. Awesome. Okay, cool. Sciencey side, and that's from 3 years ago. Why don't we look at the water test results? Mold. So I'm like, nice thing about the water test results, most in the US, not in Canada. Canada's pretty hidden. You can look at the individual sites. I'm like, hey, I recognize all these things. Some of them are fertilizer. These two are the most interesting. PFBS is also interesting. They have PFOS, sulfonate, PFHXS, sulfonate, no PFOA though, and they have PFBS in the top. Those are surfactants. So why are surfactants? Surfactants used for a lot of things. Firefighting foam being one, mining being another. So the reason they use in firefighting foam, for example, is when you're spraying, you have a fire going, imagine the fire's on gasoline or some other flammable thing, and you're spraying foam. You want that foam to spread as fast as you can. This surfactant basically creates a slippery surface between the gasoline and the foam and allows the foam to spread very quickly. And that's why it puts out fires faster. Not itself puts out fires, but the fact it's pretty inflammable in its own right. And then it allows the surface tension to be much lower and the foam to spread much, much quicker. So there's a real good reason why it's used in a number of applications. So PFOS or PFHXS is a surfactant. Sulfonates don't degrade from anything in your physical products. It has to come from a surfactant salt. If your products don't have any fluoropolymer or fluoroelastomer that dissolves into these. It's a whole technical reason for that. There's no arsenic in here, which means it's not mining. So if you look at the same site, say in Kentucky, in Western Kentucky, in the coal mine area, you'll see arsenic through the roof. That's surfactant used for coal mining. No polychlorinated biphenyls, which means not pulp and paper, which is a very important thing to check in the state of Maine because they have a lot of pulp and paper mills. So we're checking for polychlorinated biphenyls, no PCBs, therefore it's not pulp and paper. So we're looking at a surfactant, not mining related, not pulp and paper related. That's firefighting foam. Cool. Okay. So why the firefighting foam? Like how? And so here's a Google Maps. There's Fulton Mobile Home Park. How far is the nearest airport? So he's put in Google, nearest airport. That seems startlingly close. Hey, wait a minute. They're at the end of the airport runway. Well, I can see the problem here. It's at the end of the airport. By the way, it's the first one we checked. It's the highest concentration. There is good reason for a regulation of a variety of things, but this is something that really need to be gone through before. When you look at these things, I mean, look at sometimes the Canadian portfolio, and they don't talk about pulp and paper mining being a major source of PFAS, but they're blatantly so. Maybe some of the largest sources. And this way, it's like, well, it's firefighting foam. How far are they from the nearest airport? They're at the end of the runway. Okay, this might not be the fault of PFAS in frying pans. I'm just going to throw that out there because frying pans don't actually have a single one of those chemicals we just saw in the water supply, nor do they degrade into any one of those. So I'm going to talk about this later. This is what happens when a lot of government authorities are running on sensationalism and don't have a lot of data. There is a very good reasons why you're going to want to give them data. Otherwise, they'll make up their own and not double check. This is literally 5 or 10 minutes of work. Not that I'm sure there's a technical aspect. I know what different things in water mean. That's nice. There should be some smart person somewhere that can do this. I like to think I'm not the only one. That would be depressing. On the bright side, I am completely incompetent at folding sheets or close. I can't do it. It's not for lack of effort because I'm just lazy. No, I'm actually just not able to. It's something. It looks like I looks like a Tyrannosaurus Rex folding my sheets or my shirts. I bring it out and it looks like I have these little paws and I've used my face. That's me folding sheets. Anyways, back to PFAS. There are 3 new factors. So I've talked about how we got here. There are 3 new factors that are redirecting PFAS regulation. Take a look. One is PFAS versus fluoropolymer. And industry's starting to do a better job at this, separating PFAS, which is what is being found in water supplies, water-soluble fluorosalts found in water and humans. They're separating them from fluoropolymers because they're not the same thing. Fluoropolymers are these solid fluoropolymers. They're not found in water. They're not found in humans. We're not picking up Teflon in your water supply. We're picking up PFOA or PFHXA, or in the previous one, PFOS, and which can't come from fluoropolymers anyways. So separating the two from the conversation. It's the sort of same idea with phthalates and polyester. Polyester is polyester terephthalate. But phthalates are some of the worst things on earth, and they create attention deficit by killing brain cells in children under age 1, which limits the bandwidth or throughput they can get of input. And that's why a lot of high stimulus environments like a classroom burns them and they act out or fall asleep. It's actually the same phenomenon. But you don't have the same negative connotation to polyester because it's called polyester, not polyester terephthalate, other than sometimes people make fun of the fabric, but not to the negative extent some like phthalates are. Same thing with this. So theoretically, scientifically, fluoropolymers are part of PFAS. That's kind of an arbitrary, it's like a journalistic name and for scientists to try to like shoehorn things in there. They're really separate. They really should be PFAS. The water-soluble salts are really what they're talking about. They should be talking about, and fluoropolymers are what generally you use. They're not the same thing. And it's a really good presentation. I gave a really good talk, I think. I'm super not biased at all, at the sealing industry, hydraulics industry a couple weeks ago. And one of the main fluorochemical manufacturers, Gujarat, who's half German, half Indian, you can see one on their YouTube site, made a great video. And it walks through the average day of Bob and where he runs into PFAS throughout his day. And it includes like the medical device in behind. And I don't have the sound on, so you won't be able to hear, whoops. You won't be able to hear all of it. Oh my goodness, it just won't run. There we go. And I'm not going to really run into it, but it's like his day, and it goes different parts of the day, and you can see for the average person where each one of these fluoros are. And it's really, really good. And it's a lot around separating fluoropolymers from the PFAS salts you're finding in water and how prevalent. I think almost every government authority should watch this. They're not the same thing. but it's very good. Its subtitles are actually pretty technically accurate of why it's there, what its performance capabilities are, et cetera. It's really good. It's on Gujarat Fluorochemicals YouTube site. Worthwhile yourself watching it, but other stakeholders that are not as involved in the PFAS side, the PFAS salts we're finding in humans are not the fluoropolymers. The fluoropolymers are what you're using. And somebody said, well, the chemist in me is like, well, you have fluoroelastomers too. I'm like, I agreed. Fluoroelastomers. We're going to put them under fluoropolymers. Chemists, what got us, journalists and stuff gave us the term PFAS, and then chemists got into trouble by being super technical and jamming everything underneath it. Two, PFAS reporting. And so this is the second factor affecting things. Companies are reporting fluoropolymer uses, sometimes in consultations like the EU REACH restriction. So if companies report the uses of a fluoropolymer and the reason for the fluoropolymer use, restriction by country is actually very difficult. Most of the restriction happened in absence of feedback. Once you say industry uses it, then they have to do consultations and look at the socioeconomic impact that'll affect on their industry. It creates significant barrier to restriction. Reporting fluoropolymer uses to national authorities or state authorities really significantly impacts their ability to restrict it. And you can see that in the EU when they were like, we're going to ban all PFAS. Here are 6,000 comments. I'll get back to you on this one. And it got shelved. Moving forward, and some low-hanging fruit, but otherwise it's basically completely shelved. And I'll talk about that later. And that's what happens when you report. So short summary, you want to report for PFAS. I'm like, no, it's a pain in the butt. They're making us do it. Yeah, but reporting protects your products. Once you say your industry uses them, it becomes very difficult to regulate. You just put speed bumps and barriers and walls and delays and time, and a minimum time before any regulation. So you want to report. A lot of people like, so like sometimes when we're doing Canadian PFAS and they don't meet one of the reporting requirements, but they do have a PFAS chemical. Is it important to you? Yeah, it's actually used in most of our products. Perfect. Let's do a declaration of stakeholder interest. You just submit your industry uses it, so it makes it very hard for them to regulate. If you report it, it's hard to regulate it. And we saw this in the new PFOA restrictions coming to Canada. We're like, they're supposed to kick in June or July of next year. And we're like, well, wait a second. Your textiles industry has tons of it right now. You just need time. It's not necessarily unreplaceable. You just need some time to do it. And they went, well, no, we did a consultation and nobody reported using it. So we can ban it. I'm like, but okay. So it's like, okay, challenge accepted. So in February of this year, we tested 14 different pairs of children's gloves in Canada and 13 in fluoroacrylic coatings, producing PFOA and similar on the outside. So it's extraordinarily common. Just they're saying, well, nobody reported it, so it doesn't exist. So reporting is really, 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 really important. The third thing changing has to do with this, and we're very much involved, but it has a lot to do with the industry giving us a lot of feedback. When we went to Canada and Australia about the PFOA, about this problem in textiles and irradiated PTFE, they said, well, we can't change anything. Why don't you send it to the UN Stockholm Convention? So we actually submitted to the Stockholm Convention, and they agreed with us that there's a couple of situations where the PFOA in there, very low concentrations, is an unintentional contaminant and meets that intentional contaminant rules. They're not being added. Unintentional contaminants are things, PFOA and long-chain PFOA from irradiated PTFE, PFA fluoropolymer, and fluoroacrylic coatings on textiles meets that criteria and should be excluded. Now, this still has to go back to the country. The country said, like, do you really need this? No, the irradiated PTFE and PFA have mostly been solved. They just need a tiny bit of time. The fluoroacrylic coating needs a little more time to solve. Doesn't need forever. It's very much used and just needs a little more time to solve. But we had to change the convention to change the EU and Canada and Australia, et cetera. So this will affect all PFOA, LCPFCA regulation. So that's another big changing thing. Now, back to the global tour. So let's go to Canada. Canada, we've talked a lot about recently because they have the earliest deadline. I remember about 6 months ago, we were saying, here are all the US deadlines and state deadlines, but Canada hasn't published theirs, but we're betting money is they're going to be the first deadline due. And they are. And if you import chemicals, PFAS and chemicals are physical products, you have to report by January 29th, 2025. You can ask for individual extensions. And by the way, this is Section 71 reporting. We've had this every year for years. Getting an extension is not that hard as long as you can justify it. You have to do it as a company. You can't do it by association. So why are the associations, your association possibly clamoring for longer timelines? Because if they're not doing anything, you're not going to want to pay them. But the way the law works is you have to ask for it individually. They can set the stage for it, but you still have to ask for it individually. And there's been requests for Section 71 PFAS just this year, Section 70, every year. So you can get extensions within reason, as long as you're doing something. You can't be sitting on your thumbs. The due date is January 2025, but you can ask for an extension as long as you're doing something. Canadian PFAS reporting, so like the US, so you just report all your PFAS in your products. Nope, it's not. You're like, what do you mean? Canada's PFAS reporting is positive lists. They have 3 positive lists. Like, you have to be a CAS number or an accession number on their list. Like, what's an accession number? Do you ask for CAS numbers from your suppliers? Yes. Cool. You're missing out almost all the PFAS. Most of them are accession numbers. What's an accession number? They're a confidential business information version of a CAS number. They're not CAS numbers. The way you can tell the difference of them in number is CAS numbers have 2 dashes, accession numbers have 1. And most of the major PFAS coatings are all accession numbers. So to be reportable, it has to be one of the 3 lists. And list 1 is about 273 substances, mostly liquids and powders, like Krytox. So in electronics, we see it more. The polyfluoropolyether lubricant Krytox is one of those. Also, the perfluorooctanol dimethicone in cosmetics and stuff like that. That's also a powder or liquid, and it's in this category. Most of the things in physical products are in category 2. They're most of the polymers, fluoropolymers. So PTFE, PFA, ETFE, FCAM. Not CalRes, it's not there. FFCAM is not there. There's about 26 substances there. And that's like ETFE wire, that's Teflon frying pans. And list 3 are some gases, but not really the normal PFAS gases. They're mostly handled in the previous consultation. So they're mostly obscure fluoropolymer gas, fluoroether gases like RC3 and T. Not really that applicable. For most companies, it's list 2. That's smaller list of polymers. Forever says like 10,000 PFAS. I'm like, not really. In physical products, there's maybe 8 to 10 main polymers, and then there's the whole fluoroacrylics, and that's a naming convention question. Maybe 12 fluoroacrylics, depending how you want to name them. Polymer chemistry is complicated. Like PTFE can be a wide range of things, so that's always creates some complexity. Okay, so if we have a substance like PTFE on one of those lists, we have to report it. No. Well, what do you mean it's reporting? No, you need to meet certain reporting thresholds too. And those reporting thresholds are based on your use. So, for example, that part 1, those liquids and powders, we'll use the Krytox lubricant as a good example. It's often industrial products. If you're in a listed article, okay, you lost me here. Okay, so inside the regulation, or Section 71 notice, there are these individual lines of specific articles that are listed there, like things in dermal or oral contact, products, children's products, apparel, food contact surfaces. If you're a part 1 substance, which is like liquid and powder, in one of these listed things, like a food contact surface, if you're over 10 grams, you have to report. Now, PTFE in a Teflon pan is not a part 1, it's a part 2, it's a polymer. So it's not there. Or you sell mixtures. So imagine you send in with your product little bottles of Krytox. That's a mixture. So the reporting limit is 10 grams. However, if that Krytox, which is part 1 substance, inside your machine, not dermal contact, this is everything else, so like internal stuff, it's 100 kilograms. So it's the difference. If you sell Krytox in a little bottle, it's a 10-gram reporting limit. If you sell Krytox because it's a lubricant inside your machine and not dermally contacting in intended use, repair doesn't count as intended use. It's 100 kilograms. So polymers like PTFE, if it's a listed article like children's product or a mixture, cosmetics, or everything else, it's 100 kilograms. You're like, that's a lot. Yes. So that's why when we do Canadian PFAS reporting, we ask you this questionnaire off the bat. Do with your products, your uses, and some of your volumes. Very high level questions to distill, because often you're like, okay, with your products and the amount you sell, there's only 1 or 2 things that can possibly get you up above 100 kilograms. Let's go look at those 1 or 2 things, and they should be blatantly obvious. Same thing with gases, which you won't have. It's 100 kilograms, which is really, for most people, it's called completely irrelevant. For most people, it's the part 2 at 100 kilograms, with a few exceptions. Now, this is complicated. So the thing is, if you use a specialist like ourselves, it's complicated, but your effort level ends up being very low. Now, the reporting requirement is a little bit complicated too, because if you have a part 1 substance in a listed article, so you sell it in a bottle, it has complex reporting. There's a lot of fields you have to fill in. There's volumes and uses and functions, and in some cases in concentration, in some cases degradation products. But if your Krytox is inside your system, it's got very simple reporting. It's a couple fields. It's relatively easy. It's like, quite a few situations. So you have PTFE, yeah, as the anti-drip agent, a lot of electronics, yeah. You have quite a bit, yeah. Well, I'm not sure I'm 100 kilograms. So PTFE is in this category, and gases. If your PTFE is in dermal contact during uses, then it's complex reporting. But if it's internal or not touched during normal use, everything else, the reporting is really simple. Like, don't kill yourself here. So that's one of the reasons why we have, one of the problems we have, some companies like, well, no, I talked to upper management and they think you're too inexpensive. I'm like, I could charge more, but that's not our mandate. Our mandate's kind of to do what's best for you. And so actually, I'd say almost any PFAS contract we've lost in this year, almost every single one, is because somebody else is charging way, way, way more. And there's no way we could do it that cheaply. And they chose the super expensive version. Also, the super expensive version probably talked to their management and a variety of other people. We do this for a living, and obviously revenue is important, but we don't sit there and approach and pre-scale you for revenue potential. We actually look at it and go, okay, you've got a problem, we can fix it. You can be a super large company, and we have solutions for you. You can be a really small company, we have solutions for you. By the way, here's a big bonus. If you're a super large company, they have to comply to this, and a super small company has to comply to the same thing. Chances are they've invented, or we've had to invent, methods that allow this little company without the same resources you have to comply. Therefore, there's probably less expensive and easier ways to do this. Also, when any of the government agencies have to justify this kind of regulation, they have to say how low effort it will be overall. So they've had to set it up so there are more efficient ways to do it. Now, sometimes it involves a lot of knowledge base and specialists like ourselves, but once you have that specialized knowledge, it's just a lot easier. US TSCA PFAS reporting. So the US side is delayed until January 2026 because there was a reduction in EPA funding. This has a relationship to which party held the House of Reps a year ago. So to do that, they're still going ahead. It's a requirement. It's just they have to spread the funding for external resources to write the CDX system, what you have to enter data in, over a longer period of time. So it just take longer. And that's why it's January instead of May of this year. And it's just a funding issue. But still on track for January. Maine, you only have to report, so you used to have to do all this reporting. It got kiboshed because of all the feedback. You only have to report products that are in scope of currently unavoidable uses. There aren't any currently unavoidable uses today. There will be a consultation to eventually determine them. So right now, all reporting requirements in Maine are TBD. Note, the restrictions are still in place for a specific list of products in 2026. So Maine does have PFAS restrictions. So these restrictions are the same that Minnesota agreed to, Colorado, Maryland, New York, California. However, it hasn't necessarily appeared in every state because, yes, they agreed upon it, but it still has to survive their legislature, which it hasn't in every case. So I'm really talking about these ones. They're a pretty standard list in all the states. By the way, the artificial turf one is hilarious because that's a surfactant contaminant in the turf at one time. And it's gone now. And anyways, whatever. So restriction cosmetic products. This is stuff that associates the PFAS is used in cosmetics, other than PTFE, but all the others dissociate into PFOA and similar. And when you shower, go right down the drain. This is a good one to get rid of. Makes sense to me. There are other replacements. Good idea. Maybe you can take the glitter with it. Nope. Turns out glitter is way too hard. So you can remove these complicated fluorosurfactants basically overnight, but the cosmetics industry has managed to get that glitter, microplastics, is too hard to replace in cosmetics and have like 10-year extensions to redesign. Yeah. Anyways, menstruation products, which got a lot of press a couple years ago. We were asked to test tons of menstruation products in Canada for PFAS. We tested, I don't know, dozen and a half. 0 hits. Doesn't exist anymore. Long gone. So you can restrict it as much as you want. It's not there anymore. And there's this one. This is the incompetent idea. This is cookware. This is like Teflon frying pans, which do not contain any PFAS found in drinking water, nor do they degrade into it. They actually protect you from the surface underneath. At home, people ask, like, okay, what do you use for a frying pan now that PFAS is bad? I'm like, no, we use Teflon. And some ceramics. Depends what the product is. But Teflon is dangerous. Like, no, Teflon's fine. It's a fluoropolymer. And it doesn't degrade nor contain the stuff that you're worried about. That's your makeup. Or was until 2021. So this is one of the reasons you want to report. This is what happens when countries or jurisdictions or states do things in the vacuum information. You want to report your uses before they do something this stupid to your products. Not sure I've even gotten to this point. Maybe the cookware people are asleep at the wheel. I don't know. I don't think they're really given a real opportunity to comment. I think that was one of the biggest problems. But you want to report and say, our industry uses this. So they have to do socioeconomic impacts and consultations and actually have to think it through before they do something this stupid to your products. We use it all the time. We have a test lab. We can actually tell the difference. Even like aluminum foil. Very dangerous when you're over age 50. It dissolves in the presence of vinegar into dissolved aluminum, and that's what other laboratories work with use to create Alzheimer's in rats. It creates the brain, it creates the brain cell death. So we don't use aluminum foil. If we used to like catch drippings and throw out, sure, but we use actually Teflon for most of our containers. For like things where we use aluminum foil, it's a little bit more exciting to use at times because it doesn't really stick to anything, but we use Teflon. So in terms of like, well, why do you think they do something that's stupid? This is the same people that have this press on the horrible PFAS problem they've had for years because they put a trailer park at the bloody end of an airport runway, and they're wondering why they end up with firefighting foam in the water. I don't know. Don't put it at the end of a runway. They also, if everything they're out in the fields, they also have tons of stuff that looks like fertilizer, also or sewage inside their water supply too, the nitrates, etc. Yeah, it's you can. I'm pretty sure you could see the runway from the trailer park. So it's at the end. So this trailer park, which is like the worst PFAS site in Maine, and one of the first one we chose, is at the end of an airport runway. So you want to give them information or they'll make up their own. So this is actually important. It's really important. You want to give them information or they'll make up their own. Same thing we saw with PFOA and restriction in Canada in textiles. Well, nobody uses it. I'm like, I'm pretty sure everybody uses it actually. No, nobody reported it to us. It doesn't mean they're not using it. So, and then I don't think they can use Google Maps or do like various, this is about 10 minutes of work, by the way, to get to this point. This is you want to give them information or they'll make up their own. As much as this might seem a nuisance reporting, them having to redesign your product is way more of a nuisance. And normally when you have to redesign it, there's a reason why the floral polymers are there, and whatever the replacement is aren't nearly as good. US Minnesota PFAS reporting. It's still on track for January 2026. The reporting requirements are a description of the product or product family. By the way, this might be a little bit changed by I'm going to talk about the next page, but currently the purpose of the PFAS, which so this is one of the feedbacks for them. Most electronics have multiple PFAS uses, so Teflon's in your product for a couple different reasons. They're not all the same. The amount of PFAS by cast number, if applicable, which is funny because a lot of the ones are by accession number. I don't think they realize that. But if you don't even realize that, you haven't really looked into it. Contact information of the manufacturer and the payment of a fee. Yeah, this one is a fee payment. That's one of the costs. We don't know how much it's going to be. And the rule, you cannot sell products with PFAS if you haven't submitted this by January 2020. The current status of it, there is a consultation on fees and reporting. It looks like everything's still moving forward. The consultation on reporting requirements and fee payments is in process. That little hyperlink at the top in the blue and purple, you can go to it for the consultation. Definitely recommend doing feedback for that. We're probably gonna do some feedback. I just haven't got to it. I think it's due December 19th. Minnesota has material restrictions very similar. Maine, same sort of things, just their kicks in January 1st, 2025. Again, they have it's same as Maine, but 2025, not 2026. And they still have some of the things that are not a good idea. I mean, the exact same list. Realistically, it'd be really important if these were reported and they didn't just pick these off. I don't know, if they watched a movie, that would have been helpful. Basically, anytime you see some PFAS news stories talks about Teflon pans, because a lot of the journalists involved have no technical experience in it, and that's the first thing they talk about. They talk about firefighting foam and Teflon pans. But firefighting foam is a problem. There's a really good reason it has it, though, but it is a problem. Cookware, on their end, not a problem whatsoever. Cosmetics, for sure. Same people with microplastics, actually. They seem to be, but it's too hard to redesign glitter out of cosmetics, so they have like a 10-year, 8 or 10-year allowance for it. It's not a very good idea. It's also very poorly done. Minnesota's like, okay, we're banning in cookware. Awesome. It's coffee machine cookware. I don't know. So the high temperature PFA wires at the heater element inside that doesn't touch food. Is that regulated? What we meant Teflon in food contact services. surfaces. That's awesome. You should have wrote that in, actually. And the Californians does have that written in. And we got lawyers involved and saying the Minnesota didn't write that in. I'm like, yeah, but that's what they meant. They're all the same. And then on the Minnesota website, they actually have a comment saying, yeah, we actually meant, and I'm like, with that kind of colloquialism, it to be Teflon in food contact surfaces. Sweet, you're going to ban like major things in cookware and you haven't really thought it through. That's amazing. So it's very poorly done. Anywho, so the U.S. California restrictions are kind of watered down version of Maine. AB 17 bans PFAS in textiles and apparels in January 2025, other than things that really need it, like hazardous locations. The thing about the PFAS in textiles, the fluoroacrylic coating, their huge advantage is not just the waterproofing, it's the oil proofing. They repel stains like smoke and cooking onions in a frying pan, stuff like that. The modern ones don't. I hate it. Anytime you cook any onions in your house, all of your waterproof stuff now is silicone sort of based, polyurethane. They soak up the onion smell and it sucks. Not saying that the other fluoroacrylic isn't a little bit dangerous. However, it's not as dangerous as your laundry detergent, which is way worse. It's like, well, it's not forever chemical. Your laundry detergent's a forever enough. It's definitely, if you can get the honest test results, the alcohol oxalate in your water supply is insanely high. Now, it's saying, well, it's like 10,000 times weaker than PFOA and it affects your kidneys. I agree. It's a million times higher concentration though. So AB 17 bans PFAS in textiles and apparel. You know what? They could get through all of this by just banning PFOA and get rid of the downside of it. AB 1800 ban PFAS in food contact packaging, and they label PFAS containing cookware. So you can have a Teflon pan, you just have to say. So a little bit watered down, a little more sensical. Textiles, maybe a little bit too much, but more sensical. The food contact packaging makes sense. I mean, this is where we see it here. When we do lunch and learns, like we talked about earlier, another plug for the YouTube, is we got tacos. And now they've gone away from plastic containers. We get these paper containers. Paper is pretty lousy at waterproofing, but somehow these taco containers that are paper are waterproof. It's because they have a fluoroacrylic coating. We tested it in the lab. You can see it. And that breaks down a little bit into the PFOA family. So not the worst idea. However, when you get rid of the fluoropolymers, you're going to get like the Starbucks straw problem. I used to love Frappuccinos, but good luck with that paper straw, getting one of those chocolate chips to make it all the way up without the whole thing disintegrating. It's awful. I can't have a Frappuccino anymore. I know it's a kind of a minor thing, but I prefer a straw that didn't actually completely. I might as well take a piece of newspaper and wrap it around, and it'll work out better. So, EU PFAS restrictions, they've all been sent back. Most of them have been sent back to the drawing board. So basically, when they say, hey, we want to restrict all PFAS, here are 6,000 comments. And so the European Chemical Agency went, well, the way it actually works is the European Chemical Agency didn't start it. Germany, Norway, and France, et cetera, submitted this restriction proposal. The European Chemical Agency said, well, here's your 6,000 comments back. You write up it, because we're not touching that. You have to write up and do it. We're going to do some evaluations on low-hanging fruit, like food contact packaging and cosmetics, but a broad-based ban, you deal with this first. You deal with these comments, because a couple things. A, we don't want to argue with industry on what is needed unless we have to. But more importantly, they don't want to argue with their own citizens. Of that 6,000 comments, 1,100 were individual Swedish citizens saying, must have copy paste, PFAS are bad. Don't let industry get away with PFAS or wiggle out of it. So they don't want to argue with you, but they also, more importantly, you'll say, hey, I need a seal in the gas industry, or is this gas thing will leak and that's not going to be popular. And governments say, good point, you can have PFAS, awesome. And then their citizens are going, I can't believe you let industry use PFAS, you evil, evil government. So they don't want to argue with you, but more importantly, they don't want to argue with their own people. So excluding you and not putting you in the restriction is so much easier. And that's the way it's going to get. SLAP products are likely to move forward with PFAS restriction, similar to the products in Minnesota, Maine. However, consultations and socioeconomic impact will take time, even if they're looking at food contact packaging. They'll have to go through the process, which creates delay. Again, the socioeconomic evaluation and reporting do change. And if you want to see the way it's changing, here's a really good modern example. EU has a new REACH restriction, Regulation 2024-2462. It bans PFHXA. So hex is 6. PFOA is octa 8. It's a smaller version of PFOA. PFOA octa 8 has 7 carbon fluorines. You're like, but it's 8. I'm like, yeah, no, but they count the other carbon. It's a long story. PFHXA has 6 carbons, of which 5 are carbon fluorines. It's like so confusing. I'm like, yeah, I know. Go with it. So PFHXA is banned in the EU. It's banned at 25 parts per billion starting October 1st, 2026 in clothing and textiles for the general public, That's actually a real thing. It's actually a good way to do it. Instead of banning PFAS in textiles, just ban they can't have the dangerous part of it, the one that dissociates from it. Sweet. Footwear in the general public, the same reason the fluoroacrylics can dissociate into it. Food contact, paper and cardboard, that taco bowl, also agreed, not a bad idea. They can be fluorocoated, just can't leak out the dangerous ones. Mixtures to the general public, which I thought would have been cosmetics, but it's actually like WD-40 and such. Cosmetics, which makes sense. Like using, C9 to C15 fluoroalkyl phosphate in cosmetics, it will go right down the drain in the shower. PFOA and similar, and PFHXA, it's all bad things. But not industrial Viton. FCAM historically, because of it's emulsion polymerization agent historically. Now we met with a bunch of the chemical industry 2 weeks ago, and most of it phased it out. Still there a bit. It uses a 6,2 flatellamer sulfonate salt to emulsion polymerize Viton, which creates PFHXA, but not in the common use industrial Viton. Like, well, this actually makes a little more sense. So inside this regulation 2024, it's a key message from the EU Commission. It has a lot of words. I'm sorry to punish you with words, and I'll probably speak too quickly again. Oh well. The Commission considers that it is not demonstrated that the proposed restriction, as modified by our RAC and SEAC, these are kind of their socioeconomic and risk evaluation committees, is the most appropriate union-wide, EU-wide measure to address the identified risk, taking into account that the data presented on emissions, risk reduction, and socioeconomic impact, there's socioeconomic impact again, are uncertain. This is going to be more and more common for PFAS. That's why you want to report. You want to get it in there, so this question has to be asked and proven. This is especially important for PFAS polymers, fluoropolymers, and industrial applications. This is big. It's why reporting is very important. You need to get it into this section where they have to do socioeconomic, which for a lot of your uses is very difficult for them to meet. At the minimum, you're going to create time, probably a lot of time. Singapore POP. This one's hilarious because they banned chlorine plus UV320 and PFOA because of banned UN Stockholm Convention. However, they have a really weird exemption system in it that I don't even think their own people understand. But in part 21, it says this part, the hazardous materials, applies the hazardous substance specified in the first column of part 1 of second schedule. I'll show you what it looks like. There'll be pictures. So if a substance is in the first column, it's restricted, except where A, they fall within the exclusion specified in the second column. So there's it's a table. First column is the substance, second column is the exclusion of that part corresponding to these substances. Or B, they're containing a substance preparation product specified in part 2. There's another whole section of the schedule saying, hey, dichlorine plus is banned except for not in these products. So here's an example. This is the listing in part 1, dichlorine plus, PFOA, and related compounds, UV320. They're in column 1, restricted. There's nothing in column 2, so they don't have an application-specific exemption. However, in part 2, they're exempted in plastics and in rubber. But that's the main use of so if you have a radiated PTFE, which is a plastic or rubber, it's out. Dichlorine plus it's a flame retardant plastics rubber, it's out. UV328 is a UV stabilizer in plastics rubber, so it's banned except for where it's used. Okie dokie, smoky. Now, floral coatings of textiles aren't one of those, and they're in scope. By the way, but this is most of the uses of the substance, especially dichlorine plus UV320. It's written like, well, PFOA is banned in Singapore. But nah, in chemical, sure, but not in plastics and rubber, which is a lot of the situations where it's there unintentionally. Actually, somewhat sensical. They are doing a consultation on the longer versions of PFOA, long chain PFCA, PFNA, 9 and longer, and medium chain chlorinated paraffins. That hyperlink will take you to it. It's actually quite sensical. It's really, again, worth providing the feedback if you have these substances or want more time. It's really, really good. It's actually quite a reasonable thing. It's a little bit different format. It's not the Minnesota consultation format is closer to doing it in Reddit. It's kind of a little odd. Singapore one's kind of form-based. It's actually not too bad. But that's what's there. Now I was supposed to talk about Japan. Japan's restrictions on PFOA only apply to chemicals, liquids, and powders. And they're going to expand it to the LCPFCA and similar, but again, it's liquids and powders. It's not physical products. And I meant to put Japan in here, but you can see with the time, I kind of squeezed it. Since it doesn't apply to most companies, I wasn't terribly bothered. So again, we're the leader in PFAS and products. UN submission, changing the Stockholm Convention. Hopefully everybody will see it soon. The association supporting us on the apparel side was super, super helpful. But it's all last minute. The European Union, we submitted the EU for industry, Canada, Australia, EPA, Minnesota, and Maine. We have, of course, a 7225 accredited laboratory, which really does help with what we know. Again, PFAS, Canada reporting, it's complicated, but it doesn't have to be high effort. Complicated, but not necessarily high effort. So, Claigan, we know PFAS. We can make this easier. We can make the US TSCA so much easier. The US TSCA is also very different than people think. Well, I got to report all these things. You have to report whether you have PTFE and what functions your PTFE is, and roughly order of magnitude, the number of articles you import each year that have PTFE in. But I have to do all these different lab. No. Like once you know you have PTFE, you just have to know why, and you have to know how many times you have it in the product. It's the hardest part is actually know what a fluoroacrylic is. There's some sciencey chemistry stuff that's hard, but don't overcomplicate it. You're not trying to boil the ocean here. You're trying to tell them where it's used so they don't regulate it. They're not regulating it right now. They just want to tell them where it's used so they don't regulate it. Again, our Lunch and Learn series, Claigan YouTube, our first in a series, the Ultimate Primer in EURHS, really recommended. I think it's really good. Of course, not biased at all, but definitely recommend it. It's very good. It's the first in a series. If you enjoy this, it's how we instruct a lot of our people internally is doing these Lunch and Learns. I think it's pretty good. And again, PFAS reporting, feel free to reach out to us. We're very knowledgeable, PFAS. And there's a Q&A section up the top. So feel free to submit your questions. I'll try to get to as many as possible. Again, everybody who registered will receive a copy of these slides, and there should be a YouTube version of this up on the web in the next couple of days. Lots of good questions. We had many, many questions this morning. For Canada and the US, which states require B2B PFAS reporting? Right now, pretty well only Minnesota, I believe. We will see in the future. Maine is all in sort of hiatus right now. Extremely informative presentation, but you're speaking extremely fast. I apologize. I do that often more in the afternoon one. I think it's the coffees. Can you please slow down in the future? Yes, I should. On the bright side, it's even worse when I go fast and I slur. Well, probably make all the sentence into one word. The YouTube version, you'll be able to slow me down. You can actually use, you can slow it down, and it's a little more sensical. Sometimes I'm going through a lot of material. I do go a lot of fast. It's a common feedback, and I very much appreciate the feedback. I definitely need to go slower. A side note comment, my daughter says, Mommy said that you like the new Bon Jovi Pitbull song, but you're not allowed to play it in the car. I'm like, why? Because you drive too fast. So it's playing. I'm like, oh, goodness. Anyways, not really a fan of either particular artist, but that particular one worked. For the Canadian PFAS reporting requirement, is it based on the total PFAS imported per product or the total sum of PFAS in all products? All products. There's an interesting segregation of whether it's thermally contacted during use versus it's internal. But it's overall, it's the total amount of PTFE in your products. Are the Canadian PFAS reporting limits 100 kilograms annual amounts? It's for the year 2023. It's only one-time reporting. We sell a B2B access point, which contains PTFEs and anti-drip in the plastic cover. Plastic cover we touched the outside. Our company markets the product as B2B. It's not expected to be touched under normal uses, so installation only. So no, it would not. It would very likely be the simple reporting requirements. So the same thing, we're looking at a motorbike the other day, and they have a PTFE even chain guard. It's on the outside, but you shouldn't be touching the chain guard very often unless you do repairs. Where basically, there's not a lot of guidance. We put repairs and installation under not intended use. Oh, thank you. Good comments. Very informative, entertaining. Thank you. Do you have info to Oregon? Oh my goodness. There's the Ottawa Valley showing. Do you have any Oregon PFAS reporting? By the way, I actually grew up in Chicago, but we'll say Ottawa Valley. Do you have any info on Oregon PFAS reporting? Not offhand. I will look that up. That's a really good question. Do any of the regulations discuss the medical devices in scope? Canadian, for sure. PFAS reporting, for sure. Singapore, they're in, except for plastics and rubber are out, which limits the impact in terms of restriction for PFOA. Canada, PFOA restriction that come out will include medical. EU one does. The Australian one does not. Minnesota PFAS reporting, I believe, includes medical, but I haven't looked it up recently. I had that question this morning. I think the speed is great. Don't slow down. I'm like, I know, and it's fair enough. Like I'm my education once I left Chicago, and like my children's actually French, and in English first language, but our education throughout all of elementary schools is French. And if somebody spoke at this speed in French, or worse, Quebecois, which is not French, like French, but it's not French, it would be intense. I can actually handle a French speaker going pretty quickly, but a Quebecois, which is literally, I can just see Quebec from here, I can't handle when they go full speed. Of course, in the parts of England, when they go full speed, I have trouble too. Do you have any insights into what is acceptable as reasonable efforts for companies to gain PFAS information? Is it worth reporting macro level data or additional testing required for micro level data? It depends what you're doing. Canada, we start with a questionnaire to really distill it. And the reason is we want the key ones, and we also want the miscellaneous category. Miscellaneous category for companies is a bit complicated because imagine you sell laboratory instrument. If you actually look at what you sell each year, the actual number of SKUs, the laboratory instruments will be a very small number of their SKUs. It's the sheer number of repair parts and spare parts and consumables that is massive. So that's actually more of a bigger problem, especially when you get to the plastics regulation and reporting in Canada. Reasonable efforts has all to do with your level of sales. What is reasonable? Anything we do is well beyond reasonable and really straightforward. You're not supposed to be perfect. We have a lot of double checks. It's amazing. Often we talk to a company, talk to their suppliers, and then we do or don't have something. And then you Google the company and you can see it blatantly right there. So that is a bit funny. We use a lot of macro data. We do use some micro data when needed. So imagine you make textiles and you have a floral coating on your textiles. What the actual cast number is actually very complicated. And they might not share it with you, supplier. They might not even know where it is. So in textiles, once we've distilled it down to this one has a fluoroacrylic, we often do a very small amount of testing, which is covered under the project. Anyway, the fact it's testing or consulting, it's all one project. We use a tiny bit of testing to sort out the cast number, usually because that fluoroacrylic is important, but it depends what we're trying to do. If we're doing the US side, sometimes we do a little representative testing because it's extremely accurate and it gives them a lot of data. So it depends on the situation. We again focus on the most compliance, the least effort. Lots of positive feedback. Thank you. Always appreciated. Do you need to report to Canada only contact parts in the product? No, it's anything that meets those criteria. It's just if they're dermal contact or children's, they have more reporting requirements, and mixtures, liquids and powders, have lower thresholds. So it's a bunch of different rules. So you have to report stuff that's dermally and orally contacted and stuff that isn't. They just have different reporting rules. The depth of reporting is very different. If you can touch it, you have all this volume and chemical information, degradation products, and tons of other things. If you can't touch it, you have to report it's there. It's a lot easier. Where does the state Minnesota covers B2B reporting? That is a very good question. I'm getting that question a couple times. I'm going to double check. And so that'll be one of my takeaways from this, whether Minnesota covers B2B. And that's a really, really good question. Business to business, so professional products, I'm going to double check. I can't remember offhand. They're all so similar. I believe it does, but I'll have to double check. Cool. Awesome. It's a great question. I got one takeaway. I got homework on my own to double check Minnesota, which is a very fair question. And thanks everyone for attending. Everybody registered should receive a copy of the slides. And there should be a recording available on our YouTube site in the next day or two. Thanks again. And if you need any help with PFAS, feel free to reach out. And Oregon PFAS update. Thank you. Very appreciated. I will take that as 2 parts of homework. I would have missed that piece of homework. Thanks again, and look forward to hosting everyone again soon.